close your eyes and begin to take some long, slow, deep, relaxing breaths in through your nose and out through your mouth. With every inhale, feel more light and peace entering the body and the mind. And with every exhale, feel like you're letting go of all tension and anything you do not want. Inhaling light and peace, and exhaling as you let go. We picture ourselves on top of a beautiful mountain in the center of a circular grove of trees. In the center of our circle, a bonfire blazes forth, lighting us and the grove up with a sacred golden light. We recognize that this is the light of perfect love and perfect trust, and it safely and easily burns away everything that is not like itself, leaving us safe, serene, and secure. Into this sacred space, we invoke the presence of our Creator. To many of us, our Creator reveals themselves to be a mother and father, a god and goddess. Into this sacred space, we also invite the presence of our teachers, our guides, our angels. We ask that they join with us as we dedicate this time that we spend together to one another and to them. We ask that we be guided and led as we walk upon the way, becoming happier, more peaceful, more magical, more powerful, more prosperous, and more loving people. Thank you very much, blessed be. I had a question about the two voices in the mind, the voice of spirit and the voice of our ego, and how to tell them apart. It's sometimes can be a problem knowing which voice motivates us. And when we say a voice, we don't always mean an actual voice. Some people hear words, but we're talking about an inner urging, an inner guidance. The ego mind is a voice that's usually the first on the scene. It's usually the first voice, and it's usually the loudest, and it's usually the most reactive. The voice of our spiritual guidance is a still small voice. It's usually the voice that is the most peaceful. It's persistent, but it's not always loud. It's hard to hear both voices at once. So what we're giving our attention to is usually what we hear the most clearly. So when we're in a state of fear, we have a tendency to listen to that voice for fear. And when we're in a state of peace, we tend to listen to that voice for peace. So one of the things you can do rather than trying to discern, is it my ego or is it my soul? Is it my ego or is it my guide? Is to find relaxation, to find peace. And you can find that very quickly. You don't have to do any major operation. A lot of times people think, I don't have time to cast a circle or ground and center. And actually, you just have to take a moment. You just have to take a moment and relax your body and ask for peace. You can just ask for it. You can just say, I ask that I be at peace right now. I ask for peace. And once you've relaxed your body and relaxed the chattering mind, even for a moment, then you can start listening to the voice that endures in that realm. So now let's think about what magic is. Because the purpose for discerning between these two voices is to assist you in your magic. And the thing is, a lot of times people think that magic is something that they do at their altar, or magic is something they do in their magic circle. And then there's the mundane world. And we even have a lot of craft practices where we return to the mundane world after doing a magical practice, as if it's separate. And the purpose for doing something like that is not so much to leave the magical world and then to move into the mundane world. It's to make sure that you're awake, that your trance has ended. That's the only real practical reason for doing that, is to make sure your trance has ended so that you can safely drive a car and things like that. But we don't want to just shut our mind to magic once we are finished with a spell or finished with a ritual or finished with an operation. We want to always be open to magic. We always want to be open to those magical forces that are always at play and are always available to us. And when we are able to relax our body and mind, we are opening ourselves up to a different realm than when we are in a state of tension. And the voice that instructs us in the realm of magic is very different than the voice that instructs us in the realm of the mundane world. Because we begin to understand that the mundane world isn't the real world, the magical world is the real world. The realm of magic is the truth, and the realm of the mundane is the illusion. And so the voice that pulls us out of the magical and into the mundane is that part of our minds that wants to keep us stuck, that wants to keep us separate, that wants to be always at war with the magical world. There's no mistake that there are wars waged against magical people throughout history. That is a physical representation of the war that is waged within us all the time between the magical and the mundane. And it takes a great deal of courage and vigilance to stay focused on that which is magical. Now let's define the term magical. I think a lot of times people have different ideas of what that means. And so I want to talk about what that means from our point of view here today in this talk. And mostly what I mean when I talk about magic. Magic is the science of the Magi. You can trace the Magi back to a particular culture in the Near East, but that's just a term for an overall concept. The Magi were the wise people. When you go through any culture in history, there are wise people. There are magical workers. And it seems like the mundane world is constantly trying to vilify the magic workers, constantly trying to say, oh, they're the reason why we have problems. They're the reason why that our crops failed, or they're the reason why we got sick, or they're the reason why my baby died, is because of those magical workers. They're putting hexes on us. And it's not to say that there aren't occurrences where magical people do those things, but overall, it's just an indicator of that internal war that we always are having between the magical and the mundane, between wisdom and tension, between the voice for spirit and the voice for the ego, between unity and separation. When we say that magic is the science of the Magi, part of the science of the Magi, yes, is doing work that can alter our experience in the physical world. But it's so much more than that. It's a path of wisdom that we call the craft. It's just called the craft with a capital C. And the craft throughout all ages has taken on different guises, has taken on different forms depending on the age that it's been in. You can say that the craft during the age of Aries was probably the Hebrew faith. The craft during the age of Taurus was probably the Egyptian faith. In Gemini, it was probably the Druidic faith. Each age has its own form of the craft, its own form of magic workers. And sometimes those magical workers are in power, and sometimes they are at odds with the powers that be. Sometimes magical workers are employed as guides and as aids by the powers that be, and sometimes they are burned at the stake or trampled upon or completely demolished, as the Romans did with the Druids. Now we're in the age of Aquarius, and that age really is picking up steam. And that age has all kinds of interesting manifestations, and most of which can be seen through technology, because Aquarius is the age of the scientist and the age of technology. And so much of the Magi are working in realms where there is technology. This craft here that we are practicing is online. We don't even meet in groves. We don't even meet at the seaside. We meet online. because that's what the age of Aquarius is all about, is the technology, is that ability to meet in places globally rather than locally. All of that to say that no matter what iteration or manifestation of the craft that you experience, the Magi are peaceful people. The Magi, you could even go farther than that. The Magi are the ones that engage in relaxation, that engage in the realm of that which is magical versus the realm of that which is tense and separate and what is considered to be practical and mundane. When we are going about our own personal business, we have the opportunity to look at that in the microcosm and say, am I at war with the magician within? Am I burning myself at the stake? Am I destroying myself? Or am I embracing the magical? Am I allowing the magical to be the truth that is reflected in the mundane? Or is it something that I'm suppressing? Which voice am I listening to? Am I listening to the voice for peace, which is that inner world? Or am I listening to the voice of separation and fear, which is that outer world? The science of the Magi is that which learns how to put the focus on the inner world and let the inner world dictate to the outer world what will be, versus working from the outside in, which always brings us tension and upset. That's where wars and things like that start. When you start to believe in the illusions of the outer world and you don't understand the magical part of things, you don't understand how creation works, it's very easy to get involved with fighting and warring because you believe that those separations are real. But if you are walking the way of the Magi, the war is unconscionable because you can only be warring against yourself, no matter what it looks like. All war is self-destruction. As we walk upon the way, as we walk upon the magical path, it's incumbent on us to ask ourselves as we go and be vigilant in asking ourselves as we go, which voice am I listening to? Am I listening to the voice of the Magi from within, or am I listening to the voice of the oppressor from without? Because those are all within me. They're all part of myself. Now, when you have a problem that needs to be addressed, you have to really make a choice as to whether you're going to be a magician or whether you're going to be a mundane. Because you can't do both. You have to do one or the other. You're either going to be walking on the magical path, where it's an internal process of change that involves the relaxation of all tension so that you can create a thought form or create a reality from within that is then manifest, or you're going to try to change things about in the physical world. And the only way to do that is through tension. And we like to say that trying to do it the latter way is akin to trying to arrange the deck chairs on the Titanic as it's going down. It doesn't really make a lot of sense. The Magi are always saying things like, it would be funny if it wasn't so tragic. If people understood what they were doing with their minds, they'd think again. Now let's look at who the Magi were. So the age of Pisces brought in this Christ concept, and you can see that their symbols were the fish. Jesus was supposedly a fisherman, and a fisherman of men, etc. And it's possible that he was even a Pisces, if that character really existed. Although, and what is the motto of Pisces? It is, I believe. I believe. And so we had a craft based on belief. And now we have come into an age where the motto is no longer I believe, it's I know. And so now our craft needs to be focused on knowledge, not belief. And it doesn't really surprise me, and it shouldn't surprise anybody, that there's some conflict as you're going from one to the other, because belief and knowledge don't necessarily harmonize. So as we're moving away from belief into faith based on knowledge, we're seeing some interesting death throes happening as people are being required to discard their old, outmoded thought systems that have been around for a couple thousand years that were appropriate for those 2,000 years. And just like with any other iteration of the craft, the bulk of the craft is hidden because the populace, the exoteric version of anything, is always, like we said before, the external, tense, warrior. Whereas the reality of it, the Magi, exist on the internal, the peaceful, and the magical. And so the internal, peaceful, and magical version of this whole craft during the last 2,000 years has been all but obliterated because of the externalization and the demagication, if you will, the utter annihilation of the magical from that thought system. There's been a very concerted effort to delegitimize all that is magical about the Christian faith and actually burn people at the stake and excommunicate them and kill them and imprison them and things like that. It's not a big surprise that that happens. It happens not only in Christianity, but it happened in the age before that, and the age before that, the age before that. Now let's look at in the Bible story of who the Magi were. They were actually mentioned in the Bible. They were the first on the scene when this baby Jesus was born in that story. Now, a lot of people just go, isn't that sweet? They don't really look at what was said. But who were they? It'll give you an indication as to what the craft is all about. These were practitioners of this craft who traveled a great distance because they saw a constellation. So they were astrologers. They saw a constellation and they knew exactly, based on their own magic, where this event was taking place. And so they met them there. And what did they do? They gave them gold, frankincense, and myrrh, supposedly. And so people think, isn't that sweet? They gave them some presents. Gold, frankincense, and myrrh were not just nice presents. They were basically funding this child's ministry. That's a lot of valuable stuff. Myrrh, frankincense, and gold, those were very valuable substances. Those were currency in their time. So if it weren't for the Magi, they wouldn't have had any resources for it. They were sitting in a manger off somewhere. They were not a wealthy family. And here these Magi saw that this was ushering in the craft of the new age. And so they came in to fund it. They came in to make sure that this craft had the resources that it needed in order to function properly. So regardless of what your thoughts are about the Christian religion, if you look at it from a magical point of view, there was a non-religious version of it which was craft-oriented, which was magical. If you look at how the Gospels were written and rewritten, they were written and rewritten by people wanting to establish orthodoxy, which was completely anathema to what the teachings of that character were. Whether Jesus really existed or not is still a kind of a subject of debate. But the teachings were not conducive to dogma. The teachings were not conducive to orthodoxy. So what they had to do, again, this is the war that happens between the external and the magical, the internal, the tense versus the relaxed part of us. And this is, again, also a reflection of what's going on within each of us, that they had to rewrite those things in order that they could establish a church where they were in power over other people, which was completely the opposite of what the teachings were conveying. So that's a clear understanding of the difference that we walk each and every day between the voice that takes us into the magical versus the voice that takes us out of the magical. The voice that takes us into magical is a still, small voice. And it brings us into a realm of magic where all things are possible, where we have all power over the physical. Whereas the other voice takes us out of that, takes us into a world of fear, takes us into a world of separation, and is at war with the magical. Whereas the magical is not at war with anything. So the magical path, the path of the craft with a capital C, is the path of peace. Not because it's morally superior or something, but because that's the way that we have to walk when we are walking the way of magic. In order to access that realm, we have to be at peace. And in order to keep our foot in the door, so to speak, of that realm, we have to be vigilant for peace, internal peace. Because as soon as that peace is gone, we're out of the magical. We're into the mundane. And the mundane always is at war with the magical. Because the mundane is jealous of that which is magical. Because the magical is the real world. The mundane is the illusion. So I hope that answers your question a little bit about the difference between one voice versus the other. It's not always that simple. So you have to learn how to calm your mind in the moment. You don't always have your athame with you. You don't always have a wand. You don't always have your hyssop and your salt. You don't always have these tools available. You have to learn how to do it on the spot to reestablish your foothold in the magical world. And you do that by finding peace. By finding the still small voice within you, which will guide you into and through the magical realms. And be vigilant for that voice. And recognize that as soon as you start listening to the voice that pulls you into the non-magical, and into the mundane, and into the world of separation, that you lose the voice of peace. You lose the voice of the magus within you. And that's why the meek shall inherit the earth. That's why that is. The meek shall inherit the earth because it is the way of reality. It's the way of the magical. It's the way of the magus or the magi. It's the way of peace. It's the way of the adept. So to become an adept literally is the training of the mind to stay in a state of being which is peaceful, no matter what seems to be going on around you. Because that way you stay on the path of the magical rather than diverting yourself and finding yourself in a world of fear. So love is the word that a lot of people use. Love simply means relaxation and peace. Love is a peaceful state of being. Fear is a tense state of being. And you can't do both at the same time. So you can tell which voice you're listening to, you can tell which realm you're walking in based on the tension that you're experiencing. I hope that helps. Thank you so much for spending a little time with me today. I so appreciate you. Until next time, blessed be.